oops. I'm getting some miscellaneous stuff off that screen. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about some ways in which people can use AI to help support an inclusive instructional environment in a class or in all classes potentially. And we wanted to start with sharing the slides. So if you would like a copy of the slides, you can always get it from us later, but you could either scan that QR code or type in that that tiny URL, and that will ask you if you want to download it. Download it. I think it only contains a few small viruses, nothing major. It'll just grab all your bank. No, that way you have your own copy if you want to add anything to it later. Because I know when I've gone to workshops and people share a URL for slides, it's really nice, and then it gets lost somewhere. And this way people have their own slides if they want them. You can always trash them, especially if you're close to the 50 gigabyte limit that is now being imposed on us. Okay, so what we'd like all of our participants to do is open a ChatGPT and or Claude, whichever one you're more comfortable with. With ChatGPT, you no longer need a login for the basic, which now the default version is 4.0. They don't even have a 3.5 option up on the list anymore.
I must have not noticed that earlier today when I was in there messing around.
I was looking at it this morning too, actually, and I saw that you have a choice of the basic for the legacy 4.0 version from a few months back, or the mini one, which is the free, the 4.0 Omni, or the full paid one of 4.0 Omni.
Fascinating.
So you got a few options there, but I think if you don't log in with an account or don't create an account, I think you only have the legacy version. I may be wrong on that. Or Claude, which I think the first time you use it, you do have to create an account. I just log in using my Google credentials because that's easier for me to keep track of whenever I can do that. Okay, and then there's also, if you have these things, and I can drop this link into the chat, I think. Let me copy the link address. I'm going to put that in there, and there's just some prompts we put together for you to take a look at, just to get started with some of this stuff. Okay, and what we'd like you to do is actually experiment with these things. The first three things are helping to design a course, using to help design something that's perhaps a little more inclusive than you might otherwise have done. And the first thing is to design an inclusive syllabus if you're starting from scratch. Another option is to take your existing syllabus and run it through either ChatGPT or Claude. And the third option for information or recommendations on how you could use more inclusive language in the syllabus. And the third example is to generate examples, assignments, or role-playing scenarios that are inclusive of a diverse student population. And that could apply to any number of disciplines. And I'll bring the prompts over. Basically, in the prompts here, there's a basic prompt, and you can just copy that in and paste it into ChatGPT or Claude, just making changes appropriate for your discipline. You start off by saying what role it should take on, and so define your role as an instructor and teaching a specific course so that it's at the appropriate level for the course. Define the course a little bit more detail to get more detail about the level, and know that in this case, the class I used as an experiment was an introductory microeconomic class, which is a class taken mostly 80% or more by first semester students, and many of the others are transfers who are often in a similar position. And then you ask ChatGPT to create an inclusive syllabus for the course. As an example, and I can demonstrate this so we don't put any of our participants on the spot, but try doing it if you can, and let's see how it goes. I'm going to open up ChatGPT. Actually, I'm going to open up Claude, because Claude actually in this case tends to do a little bit better.
I decided to do Claude also for I haven't been into Claude for a little while, so I thought that I would do it. So what I did, like based off of John's model, is I said, I'm a writing professor teaching a writing course to incoming college freshman students in an educational opportunity program. This course is an introductory level course with no prereqs and meant to prepare students for college level writing. The course is 3.5 weeks long and taught during the summer. Create an inclusive syllabus for this course. So that's what I was doing while John was talking about the prompting.
And and a nice thing with Claude is you can attach files, because in ChatGPT, or at least the basic version of it, you have to copy and paste it into the prompt. That is changing, but I just downloaded a syllabus and I'm going to type that. Oh, there's a syllabus. Okay. So I'm going to close that now because I've got it in my download file. And I am going to go to Claude. Oh, let me bring Claude over. And here we go. How can Claude help? So I'm going to take that prompt, which is buried under here. Here we go. So I'm going to go back, grab that prompt. Oh, wait a minute. Well, this is pretty easy. So yeah, I'll just go in here, and I started actually on the second one. I'm tired. So let's grab this one and paste it into Claude. So with this you get pretty similar results with either one. So I'm going to paste it in and just say, in economics press, what happened?
Claude said due to unexpected capacity constraints,
Claude
Claude is not able to respond to your prompt. Let me see. Let's try it again.
Yeah.
Oh, here it goes. Ooh, this is different. It made me like a little box off to the side.
It does that now. Yeah.
That's cool.
So you can see your prompt separately from the output.
Whoa, and then you can download it.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's fancy. I haven't been in Claude in a while.
And here we go. Yeah. And there's the syllabus.
That's so cool. I didn't even read it. I was just like amazed by the output.
But if you look through it, it's got mental health and wellness. It's got inclusive language. It's a very welcoming approach and so forth. And here's some of the things that explained it. On the left-hand side here, it's telling you what makes it inclusive. So, oh no, well, we'll go through these. That the course objectives are clear, emphasizing both technical skills and broader understanding. Then the next thing is it builds on the neuromyths, which are so prevalent out there, and suggests we should focus on different learning styles, which is something that many of us find kind of annoying because the evidence suggests that this is one of the most pernicious myths out there about learning, even though it may have been recommended by some people over in Culkin. It actually actively harms student learning, as has been shown in a number of studies. But again, anything we do can generate some things which may not be best practice. But the rest of it, explicit statement of being inclusive, flexible policies and attendance, information on accommodations and mental health resources. And if nothing else, this would give you some suggestions that you could use if you want to start from scratch in terms of what are some things. Ignoring the issue about learning styles, the rest of it, is pretty good advice. So how did it work with anything you guys tried?
Yeah, so I tried ChatGPT, and unlike Claude, I love that Claude does include an explanation as to what are the things that the changes it made to make it a more inclusive syllabus. It explains why it is a more inclusive syllabus. ChatGPT did not. I guess the next step is then to say to ChatGPT, explain why these changes are inclusive.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, you can always do follow-up questions, and it does a pretty good job of addressing those things.
Yeah, I like that Claude just explains that up front without you having to prompt it for additional explanation.
I really like Claude. On blogs, though, on Reddit and other places, people are complaining that it's running out of resources more often, and people are using up their allocations and saying they cannot submit any more at that time because of capacity constraints. The paid one, I don't think is as restrictive, although I've heard some people complain that they were facing some delays or accessing this even with the paid version recently. But you know, these things have just exploded so rapidly, it's tough for them to keep up with the demand on their server. So ChatGPT had a lot of problems like that early on, which pretty much don't seem to occur that much anymore. And yeah, so you use that second prompt of having it do of having it evaluate a syllabus. And this is something that Claude does much better. So I'm just going to do that. Just put in this prompt into Claude. And when I did it in ChatGPT, it didn't really give me as much, and it didn't actually put things in boldface as I tried asking it to this time. So now, oops, let me get rid of the number there. Oh, never mind, that's automatic. So I'm going to now attach a syllabus that I'm actually using, and it shows me something about some of the things I should have thought about when I put this syllabus together, because I ran it through ChatGPT actually a few months ago, and it gave it a pretty good evaluation. But Claude, when you submit this, if it doesn't run out of capacity, oops. Here we go. It's building it over on the right here.
Yeah, look at that bar getting smaller and smaller. I will say briefly while we're waiting for that to load the rest of the way, that one of the things that I liked about the inclusive syllabus was that mine had a section for suggested resources on campus, and because mine was for a writing course, 3 of the resources that it listed were the writing center, the library, and counseling services.
There you go.
So I liked that it included some campus resources, like as an example in that inclusive syllabus, which I thought was important.
And ones that are very specific too to people in writing, because counseling is not uncommon when people are dealing with some writing issue.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously.
Yeah, no, you're totally, yeah, you're totally right.
And you notice here with class meetings, while in-person attendance is encouraged, this is boldface. It's a bit different than mine. It's a much friendlier thing. I said, you're expected to be there. If you can't be there in person, you can join on Zoom, but let me know. But yeah, and I did phrase it not quite as friendly, I suppose. Okay, and there's more information on accommodations, which I didn't have, but it's also, I didn't put it partly because the Lumen Learning stuff is already fully accessible.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, and it's made a few changes here. Now I did have something in here about completing these requirements, but this is just a little bit more detailed and so forth. And it's saying, I am committed to working with you to ensure your success. Now, I said the same sort of thing, but not quite as a friendly way. So there's a lot of stuff in bold there.
Oh, it approved of your AI policy, though, I think. If you scroll up a little bit. Yeah. Oh, it's well crafted and inclusive.
So the only thing that didn't get changed, at least a little bit, was my AI policy. So
that's so funny.
In any case, and then it asks you if you want to elaborate on any of those things. So it's kind of fun. I mean, it's not just fun, it's kind of helpful, because when you create the syllabus, there's a lot of things you may not think of from your perspective because it's worked in the past or it seemed like a reasonable way of doing it. But, the training database they use is pretty gigantic, and they can come up with things that you might not have considered. And apparently a lot of things here that I think all my syllabus addresses these things, but just maybe not in as friendly a tone. Okay, so that's
quick question.
Sure.
So I may have missed it, but in its analysis or its suggestions for more inclusive policy and language, did it include anything about language and like the visuals the plain language or contrast, that those kinds of things, or?
It did not, and I don't know if it does. Because it's taking a text input. I don't know if it's actually analyzing the color contrast or other things. I suspect it's probably working just on the text layer, although as AI tools become increasingly multimodal, that may break down where they may do something on accessibility. So I don't think at this point it will address the size of the fonts or other things. I may be wrong.
Could we try it?
We could. Let me take that syllabus
'Cause
and
I haven't experimented with Claude in this way yet by like uploading things to it. So that's a good question, Michelle.
yeah, and let me find the syllabus and let me redo it to add some really bad formatting to it. Let me go to.
Oh yeah, if you don't want to, would you think it would, like, if you just put it in like that or asked it to evaluate it as is, like that it would say things?
ChatGPT would not do that because you just copy and paste, so it's only
Right.
getting the text.
Right.
But let's suppose I just make one of the font. Oh, enable editing. Okay, enable content. I turn that off on my computers, but okay. So let's say I want to make it a little bit harder to read in terms of just the font size. And let me lower that down to maybe 8-point font. There we go. And let's do some really bad thing with color contrast. And let's just make this. Where is the text color? Is this it?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, here we go. So let's make this a grayish. There we go. Oops, that's not what I wanted. I must have slipped. One more time. Let's make this a grayish color. There we go.
Oof.
Okay. Now, so we've got at least two issues here. So I'm going to save this again. And now I'm going to go back to Claude and see what it says. So I'm going to go back to that prompt. And I should have taken a step out of brackets, but it just seemed to ignore that, so that's fine. Actually, how do I do a new prompt here? I don't use Claude quite as much.
Oh, a brand new one?
Well, I think we can still do.
Yeah, if
we
you
can
go
still
over
do
to
it.
the left, like just bring your cursor over to the left,
It
then it
should
will
start a new one,
give you
yeah.
the start a new chat option.
So I'm just going to upload the save version here and see if it addresses some of those issues. It would be really cool if it did, because then you'd be getting accessibility along with the rest.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, and oh, the course description was good. So but it did not do anything on accessibility. So it does not, at least not at this point. The academic integrity policy is good. Okay. There were a few things it liked. And it likes it better this time than it did last time. So, but again, that happens. Okay. So no, it will not do that.
Yeah. Thank you for doing that. I was curious.
Yeah, no, I was.
Yeah, thank you.
How does it look for yours? Does everything look reasonable?
Mine looks good, but the week by week breakdown of like the course schedule that it suggested for me is like doesn't seem doable. There's like a lot happening here, but the other stuff looks good.
But you could say this is a bit more
Right.
rapid. This course, it seems to be designed for students who can progress more rapidly.
Right.
I found my students to move at a slower pace, rewrite this to reflect a more a slower pace for the course or
Yep.
something like
Oh
that.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But I did find that interesting that it kind of,
Yeah.
and what's interesting about this too is that there's a lot of attention to developing like a thesis driven argument. And one of the things in here is thesis development and essay structure, but there's not too much more. Like the thesis seems to be like the big focus here. Like there's not as much on like developing the rest of the essay, which I find to be really interesting.
Yes. And we actually did a podcast where someone made a presentation which focused on similar things, that they spend much of the time just focusing on the thesis and then give students a good start and then letting them go from there.
That's
So
interesting.
some people do focus more on that just to encourage students to maintain focus. But you do poetry.
That's a good, yeah. That's,
You generally don't start that with a, a
right,
thesis
with
statement.
a thesis statement. Yes, give me a thesis statement for this poem. Yes.
So here's a couple of other examples. These were just ones that I put in. Well, here, this one, teaching an introductory college level course in microeconomics. Want to be sure that the materials are inclusive for diverse population. Generate 10 essay prompts, asking students about a topic which students generally have some trouble with. So I'm going to hop over to ChatGPT for this one because they both do pretty similarly on this.
And then I'm going to copy and paste this same one, but I'm going to change the
Make it,
subject
yeah.
to be something else.
I'm going to do this without logging. Oh, wait, that's Chatgate. I probably. Oh, .com. Okay, here we go. Oops, ACOM. One more time. I'm not going to log in here and just see how it goes. I'm going to stay logged out. So this way you can see what the free version is. And the free version is the ChatGPT for Omni Mini. And here, it'll give me 10 prompts. You could also use this to generate examples that would apply to a wide variety of goods. Here, housing markets are an area which actually has come up in recent discussions politically. Minimum wage, price ceiling, essential goods during a crisis, impact of price floor on agriculture, black markets, market efficiency. And each time you do it, it'll give you a different mix of things. And some of them are a little bit more complicated, some are a little bit simpler. But again, it's a starting point, and you can keep generate as much as you want until you get something that meets the needs of your class. And here, this is actually something that could be used to generate an assignment. And again, a similar start at the prompt. And when I put this one in, it's going to deal with behavioral economics, and it's going to provide some examples of these concepts that they learn, which are somewhat theoretical, but these are all nice applied examples that many people can relate to, perhaps. Gym membership is something that students could probably relate to. A streaming service subscription where it's easy to get into, but perhaps a little harder to get out of. Outdated technology, concert tickets, business venture law. Well, business venture losses may not apply as much to most students, but overpriced event participation, paid online classes. And then it asks students to, well, etc. And then you could have students submit it and evaluate that, or have them do it as a self-test. So, basically, so what did you find?
I had mine, I asked Claude to generate 10 brainstorming exercises to help students consider topics for a semester-long scaffolded essay project. And I had the same beginning of the prompt, like, we want to make sure that all course materials are inclusive for a diverse population. So it gave me a whole bunch of different things. And I'll just like summarize a few of them. An identity map where students create a visual map of their various identities and explore how they interact. a global issues carousel, set up stations around the room with different global issues. Students rotate through each section, jotting down their thoughts and personal connections. A multilingual word association, community storytelling, which is like basically what I do in that class already. A cross-generational interview, media diversity audit. And then there's several other things also. So I thought it was really interesting, and it's sort of encouraging students to interact with the prompts in different ways. So like writing stuff down, but also like looking at things, touching things, moving around the room. So I thought that was, it was a good list.
And Michelle, did you try any of these? Okay. Yeah, and these are things that you might spend a lot of time thinking up. Here, you've got a starting point. And so you don't have to waste once you identify what you want to do, you can generate examples and ones that can work with the student body you're working with. It might be different if you were teaching a business class or if you're teaching an art class, etc. So you can get something customized for, your class and the student population. And here, this is just a general prompt suggesting, well, one of the things that actually is on the slides, but there's not too much on that particular slide. One of the most inclusive teaching practices is to engage in active learning in class. And what the research generally finds is that active learning on average benefits all students, but it particularly benefits the students who tend to be left behind. That first-gen students, Pell eligible students, students from underrepresented groups in general gain more with active learning exercises than do all the students, but everyone benefits. It narrows some of those equity gaps that tend to occur. And if you haven't done that many active learning exercises, or you've been doing them and you're running out of ideas and you don't want to keep doing the same things, you could just say, there's this many students, we're studying some topic, and ask it to provide 15 or 20 active learning exercises. And then you could pick and choose those. And again, put a limit on it. That could be completed by individuals, by pairs of students, or by 4 or 5 students, and give it the duration of the activity, because the activities will be very different if it's a semester-long project or a 15-minute project or something that's going to last for the whole class period. And an interesting thing with ChatGPT anyway is that if you ask, I don't know if this is still true, but about 3 months ago, people had experimented with it, and just try harder with the response will often give you more detailed responses, sometimes better responses. And it seems to respond to that by putting a little bit more computational power into it. Whether it does or not, it's not clear, but I've seen a lot of examples, and I've tried it, not recently, but I've tried it, and it did result in a pretty nice follow-up in terms of a better collection of activities, or at least more detailed activities. And then once you pick one, you could ask it after you get the output to provide more details on how to run that activity in class. And if you want, something like the following, provide more detailed student instructions on whatever activities were there, and provide an instruction sheet for students using the TILT framework of Marianne Winklemas. And it will give you an overview of this, and it will put it in the standard TILT template where it lists the purpose of the activity, provide detailed instruction, and provide criteria for evaluation at the end of it. And it's a really nice, quick way of generating those transparency and learning and teaching type exercises. And then the next thing we wanted to talk about a bit is how students can use ChatGPT or some other AI tool. Faculty are often really concerned about students using it to avoid learning new materials, and certainly that does happen, but it's always happened. But one of the nice things about these AI tools is that no matter how many support resources we provide for students, it may not meet the needs of all of our students. Students come into our classes with very varied knowledge backgrounds, very varied backgrounds in related fields and so forth. And each student may get stuck on something that may seem obvious to you and may seem obvious to a large share of students, but that little barrier can hold them up from progressing in the course. And one of the nice things with these tools is that you can get tutorial service provided to address those things instantly, effectively. So if a student is stuck on something, you could ask them to use the AI tools in order to learn how to do better about this. This fifth one was actually there's more. Where are the others? Oh, I know. The others are all in the slides. This fifth one is one I just added. This is one. Oops. There we go. Sorry. Is a suggestion to have the AI tool check your understanding of something. You know, ask students to define themselves as a student with the name of the course and the level of the course. And if you're not that comfortable, you're not sure you've understood something, have it essentially grade your work on this. So you could, if you give the AI tool this prompt, it will come back with say, sure. And then it will ask you to input your explanation of this, and then it will give you feedback. It will provide a letter grade on it typically, and it will tell you what you did well and what you missed, and where your explanation might have been incorrect, or where it may have been missing things that could be included. And that's kind of a nice way of doing this, because there's a lot of research that suggests that when students work on explaining things to other people, they develop a deeper understanding of it. But it doesn't have to be an actual person they're explaining things to. It could be explaining it to an AI tool, which is not going to get frustrated with them if they're not understanding things. If we go back to the slides, there's a few more examples where we didn't put in prompts because we were hoping, after we went through a few, we wanted to let people in the workshop explore some of their own.
And if I could just add really quickly,
Sure.
Don.
Yes.
I think also, if you are already sharing your rubrics with students, for that last prompt number 5, students could actually enter that rubric in and be able to get a grade based on how you would actually grade them.
Exactly. And that would make it even more useful, so that students can run it through before, you know, they're taking a graded assessment or something that's higher stakes.
My students over the summer were doing, I didn't give a rubric, but they were doing that with the essays that they were writing for, or the work that they were producing for my class. They would finish doing what they were doing, and then like just run it through ChatGPT and ask it to assess it. And then give them like a list of things that they should think about, like a list of things that they could potentially improve, things that they were doing well. And then a couple of them, it was sort of like a game, right? They would be like, okay, Stephanie, like, you know, ChatGPT told me I was going to get a B. So like, let's go. And it was really interesting. But they, for them, I think it was sort of like self-assuring a little bit, right? That something evaluated their work before it got evaluated for real.
And it's completely no stakes.
Yeah.
You know, so there's no harm done if they don't have a fully correct response, and they can learn a lot from that.
Yeah.
You know, and the rest of these are the next couple are, example 6 is personalized tutorials with self-tests and feedback. So you could have asked students, if they're not sure of something before they take a test for a grade, to have it explain the concepts to them, provide them with tests, and then feedback. The test could be short answer, could be short essays, it could be multiple choice. And as long as they ask for feedback on it, they can try it, see how they do, and learn from their mistakes. And again, it's entirely personalized based on the needs of students, which is something that no matter how much we try to do that, it's not going to work for everybody. And example 7 is one of the things Stephanie does quite a bit, encouraging students to use it to get feedback on their writing.
The interesting thing about the argument is if you teach, like a class where students write like a traditional argumentative essay, right, which like has, okay, like let's find a few sources to like emphasize the point that you're making, but don't forget the counterclaim, like at some point, right? Some of my students have a hard time with the counterclaim, right, and figuring out how to go about it. So one of the interesting things that I've encouraged them to do is to engage with AI about the counterclaim, right? And see, like, give it their topic and say like, okay, can you come up with a counterclaim to this? And then it would, but then what I encourage them to do is to then put in some of their evidence, right, to make sure that their evidence is stronger than the counterclaim, because in a lot of the time, as I'm sure you've seen, Michelle, like the counterclaim is so good that it like null and voids everything else that they've written like up to that point. So it's an interesting way to kind of think about how to balance that a little bit more.
Which can also help develop critical thinking
Yes,
skills a
absolutely.
bit too.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
if the evidence is overwhelming for the other position, that
Maybe you should switch. Maybe you should switch sides. Yep. I also like to do it for like using AI sort of like as a Socratic or a semi-Socratic tutor. So have it like, one of the ways that I like to do it or use it the best is have the AI tool ask me like one question at a time
and
and
provide
then
feedback.
let me respond to each
Mhm.
question and then give me some feedback and then ask me another question.
Right.
So like I find it really like, yeah, it's great to have like a list of questions that I need to answer, but like if you ask me the questions one at a time, then I have to answer them fully one at a time before I can kind of keep going. And I find that to be very, very helpful.
And you're getting real-time feedback on each of those rather than being overwhelmed with the total.
Exactly.
Right.
And I can't neglect the end, you know what I mean? I can't skip it, even though I want to.
And the last one is one I saw on a podcast actually with an economist from George Mason University, whose name is escaping me at the moment. Tyler Cowen. He has a podcast, which is a pretty popular one. And he did an interview with Jonathan Swift, or actually Jonathan GPT Swift, where he had it running through a voice generator with a bit of a Scottish accent. So he was interviewing him about his work and so forth, and it was kind of interesting. And some people have suggested using this type of thing where students are graded not so much on the responses they get from AI, but the quality of the questions they're asking. Because when they're asking questions, they're demonstrating some knowledge of the material. And when they're following it up, they're showing that there is a lot, they're showing the ability to pursue these things in a bit more depth. And it can be a really fun experience. Let me just try a quick example of that. My examples mostly come from economics, but there's a little bit of a bias there. But let's suppose I'm going to say play act as let's say in your responses. Act as David Ricardo. When you are asked questions about trade policy, something like that. And it should know what David Ricardo is. There we go. Well, okay. This was not a very well,
No.
This was, I should have said, I will be asking you questions and responding. And so I will be asking you a series of questions. I'm getting a message from Siri on my ears here. Series of questions. Please respond to each one in turn. as David Ricardo or something like that.
I love the answer to the first question. How do you justify the benefits of free trade? Response, as David Ricardo, comma. That's very amusing.
As would David Ricardo, sorry. There we go. Okay, so let's say all presidential candidates are arguing, let's say, for higher tariffs. How would you evaluate this? These recommendations. And you could say, well, is there a way of avoiding price increases? So basically saying no. But that's kind of how he would do it. So, I mean, this is a fun thing. You could interview some historical figure or some writer or, preferably someone who's no longer alive, because there's all those issues there about impersonation of people and such things. But, there's such a huge training database for many people out there with all the OER books or public domain books and articles and so forth. You can get a really good role-playing scenario going on.
One of the things that we were talking about in the session on Tuesday was thinking about, voice and differences in tone and things like that you pick up with in writing. So it would be a really fun exercise to, maybe choose 3 very different historical figures and ask them to respond to the same question, and see, how ChatGPT does in those responses, and see if that would make a good exercise for something like determining the tone and voice of each of those different people, which is we were talking on Tuesday about how tone especially can be a very tricky thing to teach, and a very hard thing to sort of master for students. So seeing examples of, things like word choices, just in 3 short paragraphs and comparing them would be a really fascinating experiment. And then you could ask them to go further, right? And to find out, like, does this seem like it would be an accurate response or not? Like, now let's do some research and ask some questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, John, were you saying that choosing not to use currently living people? I didn't hear that bit.
A lot of the tools have been trained not to play the roles of currently living people.
Let me do
I'm
an
not
experiment.
sure. I mean, that's certainly true with artwork and so forth, that most of with the exception of that crap on X, the old Twitter, which generates pretty much anything, they generally put restrictions on images of currently living people, because they don't want them to be the basis for deep fakes and other things. It probably would work with ChatGPT if it's just in text, as long as there's enough material for it. I'm not sure. What are you finding?
I'm experimenting right now. Okay, so I just told Claude, which is giving me a hard time because of capacity constraints. I just asked it to act as Joe Biden and to endorse Kamala Harris as the next president. But Claude is mad at me right now. So let me go to ChatGPT. And ChatGPT has seemed to be the one that's having more issues acting as living people. So hang on a second. Okay, it's doing it. Now let me try.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
mine started with, folks, let me tell you something, from Joe Biden.
And it's funny, Stephanie, because when I asked the question, I was thinking of the political, looking at
Yeah.
political figures and how they would respond. Yeah. Oh, okay.
That's interesting because I had heard some things that ChatGPT was
Was not able to
was
do.
not doing it. Yeah. Because I had some prompts that I used to use where I asked ChatGPT to act a certain way, and it was not wanting to do it.
So, and that will change from time to time.
Yeah. Yeah.
But certainly if you try generating with most of the big image generation ones, it won't do things with living people for the most part. Although there are exceptions because the guardrails are not completely a barrier.
I just told it to act as Donald Trump and endorse Kamala Harris as the next president, and it did it.
Okay. Well, that's a good endorsement. Well, I mean, he's got Taylor Swift, at least on Truth Social endorsing him.
Yes.
So, but basically, we've had all these wonderful tools that allow students to interact fully with someone that never gets tired, that will respond to all their questions. We'll let them practice things over and over again without ever being discouraged. And it offers a lot of power when it's used for good. That's pretty much all I've got.
Michelle, do you have any questions, or was there anything that you were hoping that we would talk about?
No, this is great. For me, obviously, my experience as a librarian teaching is slightly different. I'm also teaching GST 104, so I'm actually an instructor for a 8-week course. I'm just trying to always keep my mind open to learning more about AI as much as I can, from the instructor side, and then also hearing how that would then impact students. So yeah, this was really helpful. Thank you both.
Thank you for
You're
coming.
welcome. We're really glad you did because this was one we were looking forward to doing. So, okay.
Take care. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
Michelle. See you later.
Bye.
I will stop the recording. I will try to stop the recording.